Hey fly tyers, Darren here. Welcome back to another fly tying tutorial. Today we're going to be tying a little bucktail called the Liggett Special. And this is one of those old main patterns that's not seen around very much. It's sort of been replaced by the more popular Mickey Fin. This is, I guess, a cousin to the Mickey Fin. And this one's from the Waterville, Maine area, and it's named after a Mr. Liggett, who was a Hathaway Shirt Company foreman. And this is one that Mike Martinick brought to my attention on an article that he did on Global Fly Fisher several years ago, and I've also seen a Bob Petty version of this, both excellent flies. So Mike actually mentions that he prefers this one over the Mickey Fin, and I can see why. It gives a little bit more color variation in it than what you'd get in the Mickey Fin with the yellow, red, yellow. So pretty basic bucktail pattern. Don't forget to put a comment down below so you can be entered into our next draw for flies and decals. So let's have a look at the material list for this pattern and get started. Alright, let's get a fresh hook in the vise. Today we're going to be using a Mustad Signature R45-79580, or if you've got a preference for another streamer hook, this is a 2 extra heavy, 5 extra long hook. So anything that's going to fit those parameters should work fine, or even if you want to go a little bit smaller or longer, I don't see anything wrong with that. Probably don't want to go over a 6 extra long. It's just a nice little casting streamer. So we're going to be using a black UTC Ultra thread, and this is a 70 denier. And this just kind of helps keep the pattern a little bit slimmer. I like to tie my bucktails with fairly slim bodies. So we'll start on by putting some thread just behind the eye, and I just wrap back a couple wraps just to kind of establish where I want my head to be. I'm going to take some flat mylar tinsel. This is a gold silver uni tinsel, and we're going to tie that with the gold side facing out, and that way when we wrap it forward we'll have the silver side exposed. Next we're going to take in a piece of silver oval tinsel. If you don't have oval tinsel, you can use a silver wire, which will work fine. And we'll just tie that in along the side of the hook shank. And once we got those both secured, we're going to pull back and we're going to start to wrap rearward with tension on both of those pieces of tinsel. You don't need to completely cover the tinsel with thread wraps, but you want to have them fairly close together. You don't want them spiraled down. You'll get a little bit of that'll show underneath your body a little bit, make it a little bit unsightly. So we take those down basically to the hook point, and then we'll wrap our thread forward, and we're going to sit it just behind the eye, kind of where we established our head. And I like to put a couple half hitches here. If you don't have a rotary vise, it's not as important, but we do have a rotary vise, and you'll see in a minute why we put the half hitch in there. So we're going to put our thread in our bobbin cradle, and then we're going to pull our flat tinsel. We're going to make sure that that silver side is exposed, and then we're going to place the oval tinsel into our material keeper just to keep it out of the way. And then we're going to start to wind, and we're just going to wind forward. And the nice thing about having the rotary vise is you can keep a really constant tension on that flat tinsel, and you get a really nice beautiful flat body. You just want to try and overlap that slightly as you move it forward, and you don't want to have any gaps, and you want to make sure that each time you wrap it that the tinsel lies flat. You don't want to go too forward of the head. You start to crowd that a little bit. So we're going to tie off just a little bit back from the eye of the hook. So we want to kind of keep that head section kind of isolated, and we want to keep that fairly thin. Don't want to start building up bulk in there before we need to, because we're going to be tying in 3 different stacks of bucktail. That head can get pretty heavy pretty quick. Next we'll take our oval tinsel, we'll wrap this in the opposite direction that we wrapped our flat tinsel. I usually like to take one wrap just at the back there. And we'll spiral that forward in open wraps. If you want to kick that up, you can use a contrasting color of oval tinsel, something like a gold or a copper. Gives that a nice look, but that's deviating from the original pattern somewhat, so we're going to stick to silver here. So next we're going to take some bucktail, and for this I like to hand stack. And because we're using 3 different clumps, you want them fairly small. So what I do is I take off a fairly small clump, and then I'll take out the very longest pieces and stack them back. And I'll do this a couple times till the hair is fairly even. I don't want it to be completely even like if I were to put it in a hair stacker. So I'll measure that out and then cut the butt ends, and we'll tie those down with a few looser wraps near the butt ends, and then near the back of the head I like to put a bit of a tighter loop, and then I'll just push that down with my thumb to kind of push all the fibers into alignment. Next we'll do the same thing with our red bucktail. We'll take a small clump, and again we don't want too much because we're stacking a few different layers of bucktail. We don't want this to get too heavy. And again, we'll just pull the longest fibers, we'll pull those out by the tips, and we'll stack them back. And it's not a really precise stacking method, but it just kind of preserves the natural look while kind of increasing the density of the tip area. So again, we'll measure that against the first wing, and we'll cut off the butt ends. And then we're just going to tie those, we're going to try and tie them right on top. And the thing here is to kind of keep in mind that you want to have a gradual taper down towards the eye. And we also want a spot here to build on the eyes of the fly after we've got all 3 wings tied in. So next we're going to take a clump of yellow, and again we're going to do the same thing, just a small clump. And we're just going to kind of realign the tips of those. If you have anything that's really wiry and out of place, you can pull it out at this stage as well. And depending on where you cut this off the bucktail, it'll be easier. I find towards the tip of the bucktail you've got some finer hairs, and they're a little bit easier to align. And then down at the bottom, the hairs tend to be a little bit thicker and kind of get into some of the body hair, so you'll start getting into the hollow stuff, and that will flare more than the hair that's near the tip of the bucktail. So you can see we've got a nice wing built up there. And so next we're going to just kind of clean up the head area here, and we just want to make sure that we have all the exposed bucktail covered up, and we want to kind of try and create that tapered look to the head. And we want a spot where we can place a couple painted on eyes. Now, if you're doing a jungle cock eyes on this fly, you don't need to worry about building up the head as much. So we're going to add a whip finish here just to secure this. And if you want, before you put the eyes on, sometimes I will put a coat of head cement on the fly, but we're not going to do that here today. Just going to snip the thread. And then we're going to take a little bit of white acrylic paint, and we're just going to dab that onto the eyes. There's a few ways you can do this. You can have pre-sized dowels to kind of do this in one step. I've got a toothpick here and I've just dabbed around till I've filled that in. So between each application, we're just going to set this aside and let it dry. So if you're tying a bunch of these flies or flies with eyes, you want to do this step all at the same time so you can make a bit of an assembly line. So we'll set that aside and we'll let it dry and we'll come back. Now we're going to do the same process with a bit of black paint. So again, I've got a toothpick, and this time I'm just going to put a single dab in the center of the eye. It's a little bit tricky, but I can usually just kind of steady myself on the eye of the hook there, just so we're not putting too much paint, and we want to kind of try and aim for the very center of the eye. There we go. Looks pretty good. Now we'll set that aside and let it dry. Then for the last step, I'm just going to take a little bit of the Solaris or the Solares bone dry, and we're just going to coat the head of the fly. Want to make sure we get all the sides and everything's covered. This will also help with our durability. If you don't have the bone dry, you can go ahead and just add a coat of head cement or Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. That'll work really well. So we've got our light here. We're just going to hit that with the UV. And we'll just spin that around. Make sure that we get all the sides of the fly and that they're cured. And there you go. That's the Liggett Special. Hey fly tiers, thanks for stopping by and checking out my fly tying videos. If you enjoyed the video and want to show your support, hit the thumbs up and share it to your social networks. I hope you consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, be sure to hit the bell icon to get notifications on my latest fly patterns, tips, and reviews. If you have a question or comment, leave a message below. You'll also be entered into the next draw for some of the flies I tie and a few stickers. Until next time, this is Darren saying, keep a hook in your vise. Cheers.